Buenos dias to our Spanish friends that are here today from the congregation. Rob asked me to do the closing today on everyday superheroes, and I'm blessed to have several in my life. One of them is my oldest brother, Ernie. He's an example of kindness and grace through extremely difficult circumstances. I wish you could meet him and ask him about himself and his life story. One conversation with him would have you walking away feeling great about yourself and great about the world at large. But today I'm going to talk about my dad, my first encounter with a superhero. He never knew a stranger, and in our hometown of 50,000 people, we couldn't run an errand without going somewhere that my dad knew someone. So errands took a long time as I was a kid. And when people would ask him, how you doing? He'd say, oh, not too bad for a tired old fat man. And he said that all of my life, is what he would say to people. But like all heroes, he had a compelling backstory, origin story, if you will. My dad was born in Kentucky in a coal mining town. He quit school after his 7th grade year, Matthew's age for reference, to work in the coal mines along with his dad and his older brother to support the family. Some years later, he ran across state lines with his sweetheart, Darlene, to get married as they were both underage. Shortly after, Darlene became pregnant with my oldest brother, Ernie. And when she had him, it was the happiest time of their lives. In fact, his middle name is Emmanuel. God is with us. Unfortunately, like all hero stories, it doesn't always go like you want it planned. And Dad came home one day from work to find Darlene and Ernie on the floor. She had died of a heart attack, and Ernie was 3 months old. Dad began to drink very, very heavily after this, and he made a series of bad decisions, from drinking to bad marriages to bad moves, and more than one DUI and drunken brawl. In 1968, he was living in California, and his mom, his pregnant sister Lois, his brother-in-law Ronnie, and their 2 kids came to visit him. As passing through Arkansas, Lois went into labor in the car, and in the chaos that followed, the car failed to stop at the railroad crossing. The accident that ensued killed everyone in the car on September 29th, 1968, my dad's 29th birthday. Until I was about 11 years old, my grandfather would only refer to my Uncle Ronnie as the murderer, and he blamed him entirely for the death of his family. When the headstones were laid for his wife and his daughter, the baby that she'd given birth to, and the 2 children, Ronnie's grave was the only one unmarked. He refused to buy a stone for him. Afterward, my grandfather spent his time between work and drunken stupors and jail. And my dad said the next 5 years of his own life were spent as a blur of blackouts and mental hospitals. He'd been arrested for yet another DUI when the arresting officer, Officer Dwayne, was frustrated. This was not the first time he'd arrested my dad in this small town. And he told him, you know, you were made for a whole lot more than this, and when are you going to get it together? And then he put my dad in jail. And when my dad had to appear before the judge said, I should put you in prison. And Officer Dwayne stood up for my dad and said, I really think there's something here. And so the judge said, if it wasn't for him standing up for you, you would be sitting in prison. But I'm going to give you one more chance, and I'm going to send you to rehab. So my dad went to a rehab center and then a halfway house. While he was there, he caught the attention of the Bonneville County Commissioner, who offered my dad a job with the county as a probation officer to alcoholics and drug addicts. My dad took the job, and over the next 26 years of his life, he counseled people and loved them and called them on the carpet when they were doing what they shouldn't and encouraged them when things were not going their way. He was very good at this job, and he loved it. During this time, he saw how woefully inadequate the resources were in the state of Idaho for recovering drug addicts, and he helped start over 40 chapters of AA in southern Idaho. My dad took the 12 steps of AA very seriously, and there are 3 steps that really drove his desires. Step number 2 is he came to believe that a power greater than himself could restore his sanity. He made a decision to turn his will and his life over to the care of God. And the 11th step is he sought through prayer and meditation to improve his contact with God and prayed only for knowledge of his will for him and the power to carry that out. After he retired from the county, he remained active in rehab work and taught court-ordered addiction classes. He continued to attend AA meetings for the rest of his life, encouraging those who had lost all hope. In fact, in Serenity Hall, which is the AA building in my hometown, there is the spot where my dad always sat with a t-shirt that they framed that said, "Not too bad for a tired old fat man." And that's where they have like a memorial for my dad. Over the next several years, the change in my dad was so profound and sincere that he brought his father and all of his uncles to the doors of sobriety, and they all remained sober until they died. He also helped my grandfather bury the resentment, and about 6 months before my grandfather died, he purchased a headstone for Ronnie. In July 2013, tragedy struck my dad again, and in an eerie reenactment from his youth, he went to say goodnight to my mom, and he found her on the floor where she had succumbed to a heart attack. They'd been married for 42 years. After that, Dad continued to work with alcoholics until one day in June 2015, he had a stroke. He was found by a couple that he had been counseling. After the husband had stopped drinking, he had a lot of damage to repair, and my dad was helping them. He was late for his appointment with them, and they found him next to the car where he had been getting in the car to go to the appointment with them. I think that's a pretty fitting end for a hero. He never recovered from that stroke. He was up and down for the remaining 6 months of his life, and one time in particular, the doctor told me he was not going to make it through the night. And Dad held my hand and told me, "I thought I'd be afraid to die, but I'm not. God showed me he has been so good to me all of my life, and I'm not afraid." At my dad's funeral, it was standing room only, and I'm embarrassed to say that I can't remember all the people that came to me to tell me that my dad had saved their lives or their parents' lives. If you feel like you've gone too far and it's too late and God cannot use you, you're just too screwed up, please be encouraged by my dad's story. Your story matters and your struggles matter, and they're all part of the bigger story. Winston Churchill said, "If you're going through hell, keep going." My dad's life inspired me to remember that bad times will happen to us all, but they don't last, and we should keep moving forward. I think my dad's life verse could have been Ephesians 2:10, "We are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." There are no qualifiers for that verse. There are no conditions, no requirements we have to fulfill. We are God's handiwork, and we were created in Christ to do good works, which he prepared for us in advance to do. So will you pray with me?